Welcome again to the Open Book Tour. This, we have decided, even though we're not quite sure how many tours we have given in this room, we have decided that this is the 60th founder talk, because that's how many months this museum has been open and this book room has been open. So I'm here to introduce our speaker today, who is a very young woman named Cynthia Sears. And she came to books at an early age, and handmade books, certainly by her teens, but did not know about the world of book bindings until she had completed her practice marriage and was a single mom with 2 girls, and went to, found a book, which actually is this book, found a book in her collection that she had gotten in her teens in England in a secondhand store, and it was a friendship book. The owner of the book and creator of it was a teenage vicar's daughter named Emily D. And of course, you know, Cynthia jumped to a conclusion that somehow it was Emily Dickinson in another form. But she fell in love with this. When you went to visit friends back in the early 19th century, you would go and stay for a weekend at least, because it took a long time to get there. And you were expected to show your appreciation by writing something, a poem, drawing a picture, painting a little painting in the friendship book. So Emily D. had created this for her friends, and she wrote, this is somebody else's painting, but Emily wrote this as the introduction to the book. Whoe'er thou art that fain would look within the pages of this book, know that a tribute you must pay of something witty, grave, or gay, doggerel or measures more sublime. Choose what you will in prose or rhyme. Do you take my terms? Do I guess right? Then stranger, open, read, and write. So, I will show you a couple of my most favorite, I mean, the colors of the paints from that time are astounding. Now this, I don't even know what the material is. And this is from 1816 approximately. And I will pass this around. Oh, this I will have to demonstrate. We'll come back to that. There should be, oh, here we go. There's another one that I love. I mean, they're just accomplished drawings, paintings. And this.
Beatrix Potter, her friend Beatrix Potter. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. Wait. There we go. No. Oh, the string has come off, I think. Well, so it makes a little cage for the lovebirds in between. Wait. Oh, there is. Okay, now I've got the string.
And this is 200 years old?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Isn't that?
What a great find.
So in 1975, I guess it was in October of 75, I had shown this book to a lot of people, and it had become disbound. It was literally falling apart, and we'll do that. And the pages were covered with foxing, which is the brown spots, and the covers were off. And I was helping a friend who was the owner of Capra Press in Santa Barbara, and that's the press that published Henry Miller and Lawrence Durrell and all those guys. And Noel Young and I were sitting at his booth, and I had brought this book in its terrible state with me and said, Noel, I'm looking for a bookbinder to put it back together. And so then I went off and had lunch. And when I came back, Noel said, well, I found a bookbinder for you. Here's his card. So it was, Frank Buxton Bookbinding. So the next week or so, I went over to the bindery and met this very charming man and showed him the book. And he said, oh, I can make a beautiful cover for you. And I said, no, I really want it just patched together. I don't care how you do it as long as it just won't come apart. So he kept it for a couple of weeks and then called me and said that that it was repaired and it was in better condition than it is now, because that was 30 some years ago, and it's had a lot of use since. But I was thrilled with the book, and I asked, Frank had said it took a lot of work because he had to wash a lot of the pages that had the foxing on them, and the leather was in pieces and he had to patch it. And I asked him how much it would be, and he said $35. Oh. And I said, you're kidding. And he said, is that too much? And I said, how long have you been in business? But anyway, that was the beginning of a romance between Cynthia, who was suddenly finding all kinds of books that needed repair, and was signing up for courses. And and Frank was not. He was a little bit hard to interest. So I figured, that taking classes would be probably the best way. So I took a number of classes, and I learned how to bind a book, and let me tell you, it is challenging. It is not an easy task, and the craft, actually the term arts and craft was coined to talk about bookbinding, because the art was the design and the craft was putting together the book. And people who don't give full credit to the importance of craft, I just don't get it, because anything you do with your hands is craft. So I was learning the craft of binding, and no, I'll do the big surprise for me, and then I'll show you some of the bindings. Eventually, all of this worked to the extent that right before New Year's, when we had finished one of the classes on binding, I asked Frank what he was going to be doing for New Year's Eve. And he said, well, first in the day, I'll go down and serve soup at the Salvation Army, because I always do that. And then I'm going to a hot tub party up in the Hollywood Hills. And I said, oh, gee, well, think of me. My ex-husband is picking up the kids in the afternoon, and I'm just going to be sitting at home doing nothing. Say, said Frank, would you like to come to the party? And I went, me? What a thought. Yeah. So that was the hot tub party in the Hollywood Hills was the beginning of our serious romance. The following day, Frank had gone out to get something, I forget, and I was alone in the house. So I was looking around, snooping. And I looked in Frank's bookcase, and with all these regular books, there were these two and a couple more that were like them that just didn't make sense to me. One is a TV guide with hot dog and a date in 1971, and then TV guide, and it's the an issue on The Odd Couple. This is the first time that I knew Frank had another life. He had not said, and it's so unlike Frank not to tell you everything, but he had not mentioned that he had this other life as a TV writer, director, producer, and occasional actor, but mostly writing and directing were his favorite things to do. And then bookbinding was the balance to that, because he said when he is on the set, he has no control over anything. There's always somebody who will change the work you've done. When he is in the bindery, he had total control over everything that he did, and nobody could say, do it differently. So this is the way he kept his balance. And until there was a terrible robbery at the bindery just before we moved up here, in which someone, or actually a lot of people, came in and took everything. I mean, every machine, every press, every gold stamp apparatus, all the books that were being processed at the time, everything. And that took Frank's heart out of his enthusiasm for binding. But to go back to what Cynthia learned, here we go. I want to show you these. These are books that were written by friends that I bound in book cloth, which is a very inexpensive material compared to leather. But I didn't want just a plain cover, because I had seen all of the possibilities of bookbinding design. And Frank said, you're not ready for leather, it's too expensive. So I became a designer book cloth binder. And this is an inlay with book cloth, which is very difficult to do because there are threads and it unravels and stuff. So this was a book that Tom Sanchez wrote about Los Angeles, and that's City Hall. And this was Nick Meyer's The 7% Solution, and that's supposedly the 7% of, that's what, the percent of heroin, is it that? Cocaine. It's a Sherlock Holmes mystery that he wrote, but the 7% solution is the cocaine, the amount of cocaine that is dissolved in what he's shooting up.
Okay, got it.
And these are your bindings.
These are my bindings. And they're not, I mean, they're student bindings. This was the second one I did. The first one was The Secret Garden, and I had a little door with ivy, and I can't find it. But it will show up. And then I did get to, I was able to do 2 books in leather before we moved up here. And one was given to the friend because it was a book that she wrote. This is the book that I kept. This is N. Scott Momaday's The Way to Rainy Mountain. And it's an extraordinary book. If you haven't read it, it's really worth reading. It's so interesting. He is taking the myths of the Kiowa Indians that he heard from the time he was a child. And he's looking at them and writing about them in three voices. He has the first voice is that of the myth that he learned as a child. The second is the historical voice, and it's in a completely different typeface. And the historical voice is what actually happened that triggered this myth or accounted for it. And then the third voice was his personal reminiscence of growing up on the different reservations. Scott Momaday came to Bainbridge and gave a talk and a reading. He has possibly the most beautiful voice I have ever heard and the most perfect articulation. His father was trained as a minister in one of the Indian schools. And Scott is an accomplished artist, and I wanted to reflect with the end papers the kind of dramatic art that he did. So this is my one leather binding that I have, and Scott wrote me and drew the migration route of the Kiowas from northern Montana down to the plains, and that's what I copied on the leather. So that is my history in bookbinding. These were pictures of other ones. I wanted to say something about this exhibition because I love it so much. I love the Middleton collection because it shows the amazing variety of design and concept and use of materials that these binders have. It's all the same book inside. It's Bernard's recollections, Bernard Middleton, who is still with us. He's 94, and to my knowledge, he's still binding. He began learning the trade when he was 12, as his father before him had done, and in the same schoolroom. And his specialty is gold tooling. You have to understand this about gold tooling if you've never tried to do it yourself. You have a book, and you have the cover on it, and the cover is attached, so there's no going back. You can't just go, oops, you know. And to make a line, for example, this is a line in blind. So that was done probably with a wheel that had been heated and then run in a totally straight line down the side of the book. To gold tool, if Bernard had wanted to tool that line, you have a blind impression, you take gold leaf, you put it over that, so you no longer can see the line you made, and now you have to, with a hot wheel, go exactly into the line that you did before that you cannot see. And for him to do, if you just look at how many times he did that.
Is he married and have children?
He is married, he has cats. His wife died some time ago, and he has a lovely young woman who stays with him, and he has cats.
Ridiculous he must be.
Yes. He also has the longest hands I have ever seen. When he is holding a book, his hands go around the foredge of the book.
Oh my God.
I mean, they're
A Michael Phelps, the book world.
yes, very much like that.
Where is he?
Yes. He's in outside of London. He's in England. I could talk about the collection for forever because there's such wonderful expressions of affection for admiration for the designs and what he contributed and personal recollections. You see in this one over here that Michael Wilcox, who is Canadian, did of Bernard at the shelf. At the table. Thank you. And then also reading his book, and there's a cat represented at the bottom. The one person that is missing from this collection is Philip Smith, who is, in my mind, still the greatest bookbinder that has ever been. I'm personally just so very fond of him. This also is a man who began bookbinding at a very young age and has done nothing else in his life, though he is an accomplished artist. Philip is not represented in that because Philip never uses gold. It's one of his principles. So Philip's books, the other thing I should say in advance, Philip does not believe that books should stay in shelves. So a lot of his work was devoted to creating book walls to get a designer binding out of the bookshelf and into to be used and viewed as a work of art. He is also alive, though alas he has severe Alzheimer's, so he has no memory, but his handwriting is still as beautiful as it always was. Philip was the first binder, I believe, in the world to use the craft of binding as an expression of what the book was about. Before that, bindings often were given to, the book itself, the book block would be given to a binder who never would read it and would just do a beautiful cover. Some would read it and do something that was related. If it was a nature book, they would have something about nature in it. But Philip's whole being was directed toward allowing you to look at the book and see from its cover what the book was going to be about. So he was the first to say you can judge a book by its cover. In this, you see the figure of King Lear, his face, and the title King Lear, and he is, according to Philip, imprisoned behind his own identity. He will never be able to break out of that prison. And the book, the play of King Lear that you read, if we were to go to the other side, you would see similar letters, but a totally disintegrated personality. And he was expressing the madness that Lear devolves into. Moby Dick, or the Search for the Great White Whale, I think you all have seen the wonderful joke of the empty sea, which was he Philip based this design on a photograph that he took at the north end of Bainbridge Island, looking out at the water and seeing the sunrise. So you have the sea and then and the doublures that are coming in, the inner cover. The sea is empty of whales unless you work with the text and put together the two foredges with the text, and then you see the whale on the other side. This is Philip. If you saw him walking down the street, you'd recognize him from that picture. This is his book on bookbinding, and he drew him, since he was the author, he drew himself, but using the features of the English countryside. And then Finnegan's Wake, which is, when Philip was on Bainbridge, he described that binding up there is T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets. And in his lecture, he said, now this represents this from that line. And I tell you, I don't remember what he said, but I know that it was far more meaningful and accurate, I believe, than any lecture I ever heard on the meaning of the quartets. And he had rendered in visual terms what he had received from the poetry.
Cynthia, did you make the end papers?
No, I did not. I chose them.
Good choice, perfect choice.
Thank you. Frank did give classes in paper making, and we still have some sheets of that, but they were much more the traditional ones where they're swirly. Yeah, I don't know how to describe them.
Was that his background, was bookbinding? I mean, did he, as a young man?
As a young man, he was a printer's devil. He worked as the kids that are straight out of Dickens that are putting away the type. And that was his summer job, and he loved that. He always loved type. But he did not know anything about binding until he was out in Hollywood and working at Paramount and saw a bookbinding class advertised. So he went in, took the course, got to know the owner, and the owner said, I've had it with this. I'm going to sell. And Frank said, I'm going to buy. So
Wow.
I drew a portrait of Henry Miller, who was one of our dearest friends, and he was an extraordinary man. I know that he has a reputation, but I have to tell you, as a person, he was easily shocked, and and very romantic. I mean, really just sappy romantic. Such a sweet man. Anyway, I had done a picture of Henry that Frank used for his binding. This is one of Henry's books. And I made a blank book for Henry in which I took the same drawing and did my version of it. So mine was minimalist, but you can see that it comes from the same source. And Henry adored Frank because of 2 things. I'm sure there were lots of others, but he had 2 special reasons for loving Frank. He could hear him because Frank had a booming voice, and Henry was hard of hearing. And whenever Frank served fish, he had all the bones out. And Henry said that he was never able to trust that he wouldn't run into a bone unless Frank was cooking. Okay, well, thank you all.